Everybody, and welcome to today's webcast. My name's Dave West and I'm the host, and I'm very lucky to have two very able people joining me, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, the creators of Scrum. Hi gents.
Hi, great to be here.
Hello Dave.
Great. So we're talking about revisions to the Scrum Guide, which is a great topic, and I don't need to introduce, I think, you two, your creators of the Scrum and of Scrum, right? Which is awesome. So today we're going to go through sort of like three main topic areas. We're going to talk a little bit about how we got to Scrum and where it came from, because many of the audience, you know, they've joined over the last few years this revolution that is Scrum. Then we're going to talk about the revisions, the motivations, the context for that, and then we'll go on to some misconceptions, right?
Just a thought, you called us the creators of Scrum? That's really bold. I would call us the parents of Scrum, because many people have contributed.
That is true. The parents, and it's a heck of a big family, right?
Yeah.
Getting bigger every day. In fact, that sort of brings us nicely to this segue into where Scrum is everywhere. Can you imagine 22 years ago that Scrum would be in as many places as it is now?
It was impossible to imagine.
I know, it's incredible. 12 million people are doing it. 90% of agile teams put their hand up and say they're doing Scrum.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, and I think this is the point, that there's only one Scrum Guide, right? There's only one definition of Scrum.
One definition.
And where did you get that 12 million number?
So that's based on some IDC data, and it's extrapolated from the number of developers and the number of people that are saying they're doing Scrum. And it's interesting that it's obviously analyst data, so it's between 12 and 15 million.
Interesting.
Every day, doing a daily Scrum, which is incredible, and one Scrum Guide. So we're going to talk about the Scrum Guide. But before we go into the revisions, Jeff, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the history.
Well, it became clear, you know, I started off, I was a fighter pilot, then a medical school professor. Then I got pulled into big waterfall projects in banks. And it was clear to me right away that projects were always late. Everything the managers were doing were making them later. This was not the way to build systems. So I began to do prototypes of small teams, iterating, and it eventually evolved in the early 90s into what we know as Scrum. And it's really a way of getting things done. The name Scrum comes from Professor Nanaka and Takeuchi's paper, the New Product Development Game. They were looking at the best teams around the world, mostly lean teams, and they noticed people working so closely together. They reminded them of the game of rugby. So they said, we're going to call this Scrum after the scrummage formation. So that's where I got the name Scrum. But then I got together with Ken, and he started working with two professors, Oganaki and Ray, on the leading thinkers in process control, particularly in the chemical industry. And they made the point that what you're doing is really empirical process control. So Ken brought a lot of empirical process control thinking into Scrum. We found that it only works, though, if you have certain values in place. People need to want to be transparent. You need to be inspecting and adapting constantly. That takes a lot of courage for people to open up the kimono. It requires focus and commitment on the part of the teams. And the openness that's needed, really, you have to have a lot of respect for people and treat them well, or they will not open up and do what needs to be done. So what we wanted to do is build a much more professional environment where there's one large company I work with that say we have the two finger salute at our company. Anything goes wrong,
somebody
else's problem.
Right.
Okay. In fact, one of my theories is that waterfall is designed so that when the project's late, which it almost always will be, there are multiple people to be blamed so that nobody can be fired. That's the reason for waterfall. So in Scrum, we want people to feel committed, to take responsibility. If something goes wrong, clearly address what the problem is. It's usually a systems problem, not a personal problem. And that requires a lot of respect and courage.
And transparency.
Yeah.
The whole thing, the prior waterfall systems and industrialization processes things weren't real transparent. So you always had the ability to blame someone else for problems, and things aren't really my problem, they're your problem.
Yeah.
Transparency requires all these other things, courage and trust and openness. But then you can find out what's going on and you can remedy it. And by you, I mean the team itself. This isn't a top-down thing, this is the team improving itself.
No, it's quite revolutionary though, quite a big change from 20 years ago, right?
Well, the whole world has changed. Go try to find a standard factory anymore. And instead you'll find just-in-time processing and CRMs, and everything's changed.
Yeah, exactly. So you would say that the sort of essence of Scrum really is this sort of this focus on empiricism, this focus on self-organized teams, these lean principles that you
Right.
talked about, Jeff.
Yeah, and it really focuses on the idea of a single team taking, looking at a problem, looking at what someone wants done, and choosing how much they think they can do, and them having the skills and talents and the capabilities, and if not, going and getting them, or learning, doing the best they can to turn that into something that's useful. The most productive things Jeff and I have seen, both in our personal use and as consultants, was single team. My goodness, because they can talk and they can work and create relationships. However, classic is someone coming to us and saying, well, we have 900 people. Okay, you can still use Scrum, but get ready for lower productivity because the teams have to coordinate with each other. Scrum scales very nicely, but the best things that work are the single teams, and that's what we see over and over in lean production.
So it's all about the individual teams, it's all about self-organization.
Right, and the companies that do this best, they give the individual teams the most autonomy.
Yep.
So if you look at Spotify or Amazon, they have hundreds, thousands of teams, but every team is as much as possible, has their own integrity, their own pieces that they're working on, and they can do it without being held back by the rest of the organization.
So
It really comes to play when the team is putting things live frequently, and if it doesn't work, wow, it comes right back to them. So it's accountability. The team, it's being an adult.
and a lot of trust has to be bestowed onto those teams, right?
And learning.
And it's about continuous learning. So if we talk about, you mentioned it Ken, the sort of like the future and the fact the world is a lot more complex than even 20 years ago.
So Scrum is being used more and more, and I'd like to think that that's because it's such a brilliant idea. I think it's much more that it's really, really needed. When Jeff and I, we've known each other since the 80s, we started with Waterfall, and then pretty soon we were developing with OO and building networks and PCs, and then we got to the Web 2.0 commercialization of web, and then you have the iPad and the internet where you can have commercialization. Huge changes underway. I've seen them projected in terms of three things now. One is people. We have population growth, incredible population growth and shift. We have, to avoid all sorts of conflict, we have something called Mother Earth, which is changes in the way that the world's working. We have desertification, we have all sorts of things, so that moves people and changes them around. And then we have technology, huge input of technology was the iPhone 7, where we have something where I can communicate on a powerful computer with all sorts of people and back and forth. And then you have, combine those three, people shifting around and people moving into iPhones, and you have cultural instability, and you have things like the Arab Spring. So we're in a time of a phenomenal amount of change.
So the age of accelerations, they call it, don't they? Thomas Friedman.
Yep, rapid accelerations. I look at what people are studying now, and it goes into robotics, and we'll do our prototyping on 3D printers, and all of this is great ideas, and that's the sweet spot of Scrum, because the idea of Scrum is to have someone with a vision something they think is possible or would like to try investing in things, and they have a team of people who have some skills or think they can do something with it, and to find out if they can create something usable out of it. And it's not necessarily a given thing, but they'll find out, and they'll find out quickly. So the idea is, let's try, let's see if it works. If not, let's might change what we want. And with the vision, the ability to vision being mandated by those three huge changes, the need for Scrum is phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah, the world really does need Scrum. And I think that's why we're seeing those 12 million, 15 million people do it every day. And
Yeah.
that's only going to grow, this empiricism, this continuous learning. So,
And accountable teams.
and accountable teams, ownership. It would be very hard to do waterfall in this modern world, hey?
Right.
Well, when you do something really, really, really hard, you might want to try waterfall. So that's where we had Obamacare, where all of a sudden everyone said, hey, it didn't work. Oh. So they'd been using Scrum, they might have known that earlier.
So Jeff, that sort of brings us into the Scrum Guide. So tell us a little bit about the history of the Scrum Guide, while we're in this place, as it were.
Well, Ken and I actually worked together way back in 1987, right? On a big waterfall project.
This building,
And this, yeah.
we haven't moved an inch.
And, but I was, in some of the companies started to prototype something other than that approach. And it culminated in a company called Easel Corporation, where we really got it working well for new product development. And about the time Easel got acquired by VMark in 1995, Ken took a look at it. I said, Ken, this really works. We should be selling this instead of waterfall. Basically, that was I was trying to convince
So out
Ken.
of necessity. Then,
Yeah,
you
right.
built
Because
this
Ken
approach.
was selling project management software packages and training people how to do waterfall projects.
Go on.
So he made a quick decision, right?
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah, but then we said we have to write a paper on Scrum. So we started work on the first paper. Ken did most of the writing, and I was chair of a workshop at UPSLA that hosted papers like this. We brought it into the 1995 UPSLA. It was published in a book that came out of that particular workshop. And that was the first formal paper on Scrum.
And you had a lot of people who really contributed to what we pulled together. I'm going to ruin his last name, but John Scrum-Natalis.
Yes. John Scalatellis was the first Scrum Master at Easel. And Jeff McKenna was a coach, a consulting coach to the Easel team. And so those two guys were a key to making this all work. Also, the first product owner at Easel was a guy named Don Rodner, who did a fantastic job at delivering a product. And so the combination of them plus the team, we had an international team, Danish, Russians, Germans. So it was really an international thing right from the very
Very
beginning.
diverse.
Yeah.
And from the very beginning, it was us finding out what worked and didn't work, and we would feed that back into what eventually became Scrum. Scrum has evolved over the years.
So tell me a little bit, so when did the Scrum Guide, so the Scrum Guide, the ultimate body of knowledge for the framework?
Well, Waterfall wasn't doing well for years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
And,
Still having trouble.
Still around, unfortunately.
and we
Bad
had
smell.
the Agile Manifesto, where a bunch of us got together who were using lightweight processes like Scrum and XP and things like that, and published that. And Scrum really was the predominant one that took off for a number of reasons. And so more and more people were using Scrum, and by 2009, there weren't that many people, except for, I don't know, there weren't that many people using Waterfall. And there were many, many interpretations of what Scrum was, because there were books out there, there were papers, there was our original paper, there was patterns books, and it was turning into almost like the OO wars, led to OMG practices. So I decided that I really needed to take and create something, and I talked to Jeff about this. We needed something that would really simply explain the concepts that we had for Scrum, and to do so in a skeleton, in a framework that didn't restrain people, but instead enabled them with the ideas of empiricism, small, self-organizing, self-managing teams, and lean thinking. And so we took a crack at that, of putting that up, and that was the very first Scrum guide in 2009. No commercial interest, nothing. We did it because we thought it was necessary to create some purity around our ideas, because they were simple ideas.
Yeah.
And also then what we did was start giving people a way of finding out if they knew Scrum. So there was some, I forget what the name of it was, Class Marker, I think, a testing tool, where you could put up assessments where people could take, spend an hour and see if they knew Scrum. They answer a whole bunch of questions, true, false, multiple choice, etc. And they could take it, and it was so low price that we could give it to them for free and anonymously. And so we're sitting there watching it, and when first Scrum Guide first came out and the first anonymous assessments came out, the average score was 30 to 40% correct. And that was terrible. But they had something to go back to. They went back to the Scrum Guide and studied and said, oh, I see, okay. Yeah. And the scores have been going up ever since. And so we found that, and this is a well-known thing for certifications and assessments, is to always have a single, authenticated by the people who know how it should work, body of knowledge. And that's the Scrum Guide. And
it's 16 pages, so which is, unless it's in German, which is probably like 20 pages, but a lot more words, or longer words. But and it's translated into 43 languages or something. I mean, it's incredible how far millions of people download it every year, which is great. So let's talk a little bit about 2017, this release of the Scrum Guide. This is why everybody's here. So let's go into the overview. So,
let's just a second. We put the Scrum Guide up, and all of a sudden, people started. They were all over us. What about this? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by this? How come you're not this? And so we put it up in a place which was a neutral, open area, accessible to everyone, where all these translators were able to get to it. And I think someone who's Jeff's my enemy put up a user voice which said, give us your ideas. Give us your ideas of what things would help you use this better. And so we read through that and read whatever we can that's of value, and come up when we think there are enhancements that are needed with the releases.
And I think that's an important point. The point that you're making is that the user voice is really where we capture a lot of user feedback on the Scrum Guide.
Right.
And the points that you raised about clarity and the whole point of that.
Sometimes people misinterpret what we said. We thought it was clear, but then they take it in a different direction. So we need to tune the guide so that it's clear.
Yeah. So Jeff and I both have the Chicago style guide. So we say things exactly, perfectly correct. And we have studied minimal requirements approach so that it has just this and nothing more. We want to enable people, but we don't want to restrain them. So it's just a framework of those three big ideas and nothing else. So it can be used for anything where you want to turn something that's, someone's got a vision, into something that's potentially usable.
Yeah. So there are changes we're just about to release. I believe the new version is now available at scrumguides.net, which is tricky to say.
It's up now?
I think yes. I think we made it available at 11 o'clock Eastern, I believe. So the changes were motivated by people using it, terminology, understanding, clarity, etc. And I think there's 5 main changes. One's around a new section around the use of Scrum, which we'll be talking about in a minute. The role of the Scrum Master, just a little bit more clarity on that because it's such an important and pivotal role to Scrum's adoption. The The idea of the daily, which is often misused, particularly around status reporting and the like, as we all know. Time boxes, a little bit of clarity around that. And then I think a very important idea around continuous improvement, or Kaizen, that lean principle of your continuous improvement. So let's talk about those 5 things. Let's start with the uses of Scrum. So tell me a little bit about the uses of Scrum. And Jeff, you're out in the field all the time. We're looking to get you here. You're always out.
From the very beginning, initially at Easel it was software development that we're using Scrum, but then quite quickly it started to expand beyond that. And my wife actually wrote a paper on Scrum in church. Ken and I were watching what she was doing, and that was an organizational Scrum. And
that's being used more and more.
And the venture group I work with, Open Venture Partners, here in Boston, back in 2006, they took a look at Scrum. They wanted it in their software companies, but they said, hey, this works for the whole organization. And so the venture group is run by Scrum. Everything is a Scrum team. So I started working on trying to expand out Scrum beyond IT, starting with the venture group. And today I would say the company I'm working with is working mainly with non-software companies. We're working with oil guys drilling oil. We're training people how to drill oil right now. We work with automobile manufacturers. We work with 3M, materials science. There's a little bit of software everywhere, but it's really that they all tell us, we're not software companies. Don't talk about software. Talk about how Scrum can build a better Scotch tape.
So you're hoping this...
or a better car.
Or get more oil. Or
self-driving car, get more oil.
Yeah, so you're hoping that this section will just sort of like put to rest that debate that you hear continuously. Well, yeah, Scrum's great, but we're not a software company. Yeah. Why would we want to do Scrum?
If you have a vision and it's in a complex, even chaotic area, and you want to see if you can create something useful out of it, without wasting money by going after something that's not going to work.
Yeah.
Scrum's an answer. You can come up with your own version, but we don't charge anything, so go to it.
It's a great starting point, as it were.
Yeah.
So this section hopefully will clear some of that and make some of that clarity.
Yeah, what they'll probably do is Jeff and I changed Scrum a lot in thinking over 20 years by things that didn't work, or things that caused problems, things that cause people to hunt us in the dark, and so we refined it. People can take advantage of what we've learned by using the current version of Scrum.
It's a great starting point. So that's going to be fantastic. So the next one really is just the role of the Scrum Master. I know, Ken, you've got a very strong opinion about the role of the Scrum Master.
The Scrum Master is, everyone says, oh, Scrum Master, oh, that's such a big word, that implies mastery of this. I met this person, they're barely master of their own kind of shoes. I think I mentioned, we're in a world of a huge amount of change and huge amount of opportunities. Robotics, 3D printing, material sciences, the Scotch tape, the cars that we drive, self-driving cars, all these things. So people have visions. I mean, I even saw a rocket land itself back on the Earth. This is incredible. So we have these ideas and these visions of how to use all these new advances in sciences. And a Scrum Master is someone who is skilled at helping someone turn these visions, if possible, into something of value. And if not, to find out what needs to be changed and what else, how it can be done differently. And so the Scrum Master is the master of empiricism, small self-organizing teams, lean thinking, and working with people to make that happen. It's a very, very tough job. Their main skill is the ability to bind people together and help them work together when things don't work and when they do work, and to celebrate. But it's not a simple job at all, and the mastery is in those 3 areas. I see a lot of Scrum Masters, and myself included, you go into some organizations and it's just not possible to use Scrum. They're culturally unwilling to delegate. They're culturally unwilling to accept accountability. They've got problems. And so the Scrum Master's job used to be more before. Now people are more willing because there's more need. Before it was to get people to change, to do culture change. Less and less than that. So we should tell our Scrum Masters, go in there, help them as much as you can. But it's really going to test your patience because you're changing their way of thinking, and people do not change readily.
So hopefully we've added some more clarity to that role with the changes. To
Well, we've added some clarity, and also the world is demanding more of us.
It's an important role.
Yep.
Very, very important.
We used to say, you know, Scrum will help you leave your opponents in the dust.
Yeah.
Now it's if you don't use this, you will be in the dust.
Not that you're putting any pressure on anybody.
Yeah.
So
It's those three factors that are putting pressure on. Jeff and I are observers.
Yeah, the market will correct things. And
Unfortunately.
the winners will be
it's
doing
not
good
always,
Scrum.
tell that to the dodos, hey? You know, not necessarily good to be a dodo. So the daily, which is the sort of, everybody resonates to this as oh my gosh, everybody meets every day for 15 minutes. So we made some changes to you made some changes to the wording around the daily, particularly around the 3 questions, etc.
Yeah, the daily Scrum has been one of the biggest problem areas in Scrum because people have viewed it as, I'm just reporting my status, and you go around the circle and everybody's working whatever they're working on, and nobody has any impediments, and nobody's sharing or collaborating, and it's a waste of time, and it doesn't improve. Whereas the daily meeting is designed to look, it's like a football huddle. You look at what you're doing, and you try to figure out why the quarterback got sacked yesterday, and then you're going to do a different play with different assignments of people today. So it's actually a replanning and a reshifting of focus every day. And we tried to facilitate that better in 2013. We changed the questions in the Scrum Guide to focus on the Scrum goal. So at least they were constantly addressing, are we heading in the right goal? Are we going to win the game in this sprint, basically? But we're finding that people have taken a variety of approaches to this, and some of them that have been quite successful have focused on looking at the backlog, looking at the Scrum board, and figuring out, okay, what's going to move those stories the fastest to done? Yeah. And so a more focused discussion on the backlog itself. I even wrote a paper a few years ago with Scott Downey called Shock Therapy, how to boot up teams really fast. And in that paper, the daily meeting was only about the first story on the board. Is it done or not? And if it's not done, how can the entire team get that done today? We talk about nothing else. That actually works, okay? So we said, okay, we still have the daily Scrum questions as possibilities, but we're opening it up to more creative approaches to really moving that backlog to done. And so now they're optional instead of mandatory.
The 3 questions were intended to find out where we were, how that compared with where we thought we would be, and what we were going to do that would best use our work during the next day to accomplish something that we thought we could do. I remember our favorite things in the early days of Scrum was Scrum Master not showing up at the daily Scrum. And the team would show up and they're like, well, who do we report to then?
You do report progress to.
You report to yourselves. You guys this is yours.
That's a good trick though, in Scrum Masters. Don't attend your Scrum and see what happens.
That's how your tires get slashed.
Well, hopefully we've added some more clarity.
Yeah, we got a question from a magazine. It said, you say that one of the principles of Scrum is inspect and adapt. I don't understand how the daily Scrum has anything to do with inspect and adapt. We're like, oh. Okay. It's inspect where we are today against what we said we would do, and make an adaptation of what we're going to do next that will optimize our chances of delivering something of value. Duh.
I know. Well, hopefully they'll understand a little bit better now. And which brings us to the next one, which is about time boxes. Seems a simple enough thing, but there seems to be some confusion about the time box. Jeff, tell me a little bit.
Our intent has always been that the time boxes in Scrum are maximums, but somehow that wasn't
They're
communicating.
minimum, surely.
Yeah, somehow that wasn't communicating. So, and that was reflected in the feedback. And so we clarified that in the Scrum Guide. Every time box is at most that time, and possibly less. In fact, we see that for many of the, for example, sprint planning, the optimum time for sprint planning is less than half the time boxes. And in fact, those teams that can actually deploy continuously, like Amazon deploys every 11.6 seconds, they deploy a new feature. Okay.
That's a few.
Their the sprint planning for teams like that, their backlog is in such a good ready state that it's a very short discussion. Might be a half an hour, or less than an hour for a 2-week sprint for a team like that.
But if you're in a very unknown, almost chaotic environment where you're trying to create something, you're going to find yourself butting against the end of the time box because there's a lot of thinking that you have to do and work you have to do to think about where are we, what are we going to do next. So, just like life, it depends. And we're kind of in a twist about what to do with this. We were either going to put this into this discussion, or we were just going to buy a copy of a dictionary and send it out to everyone who says they're using Scrum.
That might be a lot, 12 million.
Yeah, because it says time
Dictionaries out
boxing
there,
yeah.
refers to the act of putting strict time boundaries around an action. It doesn't say you got to use it.
I think that's going to be good for people to hear, because people do take things literally. You know that.
Well, then they ought to read the dictionary, literally. I mean, see, this Scrum is not for people who can't think.
Do you mean it's not a methodology?
No, it
Oh.
doesn't tell you what to do. You've got to.
Everything is designed to deliver more value in less time. And so anything that does that is we want to encourage, and anything that doesn't, we want to diminish.
So hi, buddy. We've got something we'd like to have you do, and we want to use 3D robotics and just-in-time processing and CRM, and we'd like to have it up as soon as possible. By the way, we're using a new type of material science. The periodic table is up to 120 elements now, so you're going to have to cope with that too. Go to it. This is not easy. This is hard. This is for the hard work of our society adapting to what's going on.
Wow.
This is not for simple things.
Oh dear, that's always disappointing. I guess that brings us to continuous improvement. We've, made a pretty significant change here. I mean, I think we're going to get some interesting feedback on this, or you guys are going to get some interesting feedback on this.
Well, I've been working with the Scrum Patterns group for the last 5, going on 10 years. And one of the patterns that evolved out of my work with around the world was, if you don't take the process improvements you find in the retrospective and actually do something with them in the next sprint, Scrum doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
And we actually got some comments from clients that the Scrum Guide doesn't say that we have to improve anything every sprint.
No?
So I said, Ken, we got to put something in there that they actually have to improve. Scrum is a continuous improvement process.
And that's how we watch our society. People don't work on their marriages, so strange enough you get divorced. I mean, if you don't work on the way you're working as a team using Scrum, guess what? It's not going to work. And so Jeff and I really struggled with this one because this is starting to add prescriptive to this. It's saying, do this. We're trying to make sure they do. These are the keywords. Make sure they do self-improvement. A team that doesn't see value of self-improvement, that doesn't care about self-improvement, that doesn't care about itself, is going to ignore this. A team that understands, they got to improve to do things better, is already doing this. So I fully expect in the user voice people to be saying for the next one, hey, you said Scrum was just a framework. This is a methodological procedure. So we'll see.
Yeah, but the intent is to encourage
The
people to
intent
be
is encourage.
continuously improving,
Exactly.
Right. But I do expect that people aren't going to see the word least. They're going to say, oh, we could have lots of high priority process improvement.
Actually, I was all for just one, but Ken says, no, we don't want to be that prescriptive.
You'd
You
like
only
to
need
have
to do
one,
one.
right?
You only need one to get the
This is the
benefit.
advantage of a framework is you let people figure out what works best in their situation
Yeah.
and just give them a framework.
Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll have to watch the user voice and see what happens.
Yeah.
So talking about people that misinterpreting the framework, we see on user voice all the time lots and lots of misunderstandings around the use of Scrum and how it can be applied.
Oh, we hear that both in talks we give, hey, what about this? And also we've seen people misunderstand what Scrum is and isn't and go at it to build commercial ideas and methodologies in this that are taking on things that have nothing to do with Scrum. And we just thought we'd mention a few of those that are just utter misconceptions.
Okay.
Hogwash is another word, but
Yeah.
misconceptions is a politer phrase.
Yes. Yeah. So,
Hogwash is a British phrase, right?
well, obviously, everything is really. I'd just like to say that. Okay. Let's start with something that is about software delivery. I think we talked about this earlier, but there's many people in many organizations around the world that are trying to use Scrum, and their boss and their teams are saying, no, it's only for software development, right?
Mainframe software development.
Mainframe software development.
Yeah. And that's not true. It's used in many different domains. And so we have governments using Scrum to write laws, develop regulations. In addition to product development, it can be a service. You know, our company runs everything with Scrum, and we're just providing services. So.
One of the first things that Jeff and I were working on at IDX, which is now part of GE Medical, was building a teleradiology service, which was new types of servers that could hold radiological images, making the images lossy or lossless compression and getting FDA approval on that, getting an internet fast enough to do that, making so radiologists could work on that and share the ideas globally. Software was like glue, but the rest of it was the hard part. We have been working on holding together advances in all of these ideas with people working on it with Scrum for a long time. To say it's just software misses the point entirely.
Yeah. I think well, hopefully with the start of the Scrum Guide, it's had some clarity around that as well. So we should hopefully address that. And the next one really is something that is leveled against. I've heard both of you deal with audience members talking about this. So you can only release at the end. So
you can only release at the end of the sprint. Who says you can release at the end of the sprint?
Well, nobody. People interpret that sprint review as a phase gate. They interpret it waterfall. You'd have a meeting where you would all sit around and say, is it ready to be released?
So quite often, we would go through, in slower companies, go through 3 or 4 sprints before they say, oh, okay, I've trained my staff in all our organizations now who use this software. Let's release it so they can start doing stuff. The idea was, remember, inspect and adapt, is to have something done that's useful and could be used by people if they chose to at the end of the sprint.
So the minimum.
As minimum, so we could do a checkbox. There's nothing that doesn't say you can't do that 5,500 times a day if your users can absorb it, if you can absorb it, or if there's value in it. There's nothing that doesn't say you can do it every other day or when you wake up in a good mood. Scrum doesn't say anything about this, and yet people have read into it quite the opposite.
I wrote a paper in 2005, it was called The Future of Scrum, and it was about the work that Ken and I did at a company called Patient Keeper, and it was all about continuous deployment. That's the future. Everybody's going to deploy every day, not just at the end of the sprint.
You had it really going in a lean
Yeah.
continuum.
There was a big reaction to the Scrum community. I remember they said, "Oh, that's not Scrum."
It's not stats. So Jeff and I almost lost our jobs. This is really sad.
Oh dear, you have to call it something else. But so that means the sprint review is actually reviewing software in production now, potentially. Reviewing the results of users
Yes,
using
in fact, at Patient Keeper, the sprint review was, we turn it on, like at Mass General downtown, 5,000 nurses and 1,000 docs sign on, and we wait to see if they call. That's the sprint review. We're demoing, we're showing product to the stakeholders.
People are actually
We want their feedback.
Yeah, we
And
want people that are investing in this to be able to say,
Yeah.
okay, so
could be quite
this is
worrying.
what I got for my money. Now what's the next best thing to do?
That sounds like an excellent sprint review with real data, with real users, those 5,000
Right.
nurses going, oh, this is what I'm doing. Why are they not pressing that button?
Right.
And this is where all those things that we were talking about before, the values of transparency, openness, courage, trust, all those things come into play because it will go nowhere if people have things to hide, to cover. They don't trust that this is really a purposeful meeting.
And suppose the most transparent system is when the actual customers are using it. Hey?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and also the most scary as well. I'm not sure I'd want to always be in those sprint reviews.
If they know you're listening to them, if you are listening to them, it's not scary.
I don't know. Users.
It's good to know if you're right. on
Fast
track.
rollback is one of the,
Yes, obviously
one of
that's
the
one of
good
the
criteria.
criteria of any continuous delivery. And so then continuous delivery is one aspect of this new sort of like phenomenon called DevOps. So tell is Scrum and DevOps, are they competitors? Are they, tell me a little bit about that.
I believe, not to imply malice on anyone's part, but DevOps is based on a misunderstanding of what Scrum is, and or possibly it's based on a commercial opportunity that Microsoft and other companies saw for their ALM tooling. But DevOps implies that they're separate. This thing where we very early were bringing up very sophisticated hardware. We needed tremendous networking capabilities. We needed good hardware to do it. We needed all sorts of capabilities. When you start a project, you set service level agreements. Otherwise, you build software. Again, we have the example of Obamacare that doesn't work. People get on and only 4 people can get on at once. So you want to set service level agreements of stability, quality, the scalability, all of that, and you want to prove with the smallest bit of functionality that you can do in the very first and second sprint that you have an architecture, you have an operational environment that can sustain those, because if you don't proceed or change your goals. And so you're in development and operations and technology change and all that as of the very first, second sprints. Remember we were working in Patient Keeper and we went and got SLA and it said that we were going to acquire huge Sun servers.
Yeah, I remember that.
And we couldn't afford it, nor could our customers. So we scaled back our SLAs a little bit and said, is this good enough? Because you can't afford that. Without that sort of inspect and adapt, without that sort of transparency, to say that it's mixed up with the software thinking that a project is just building software and here's the functionality, good luck with it, operations.
We were talking about earlier this morning, it was all the way back in 1996. I view this as an extension of the definition of done. You know, even back in the very first Scrums, we wanted testing inside of the Scrum. So we pull definition of done includes testing. But even in 1996, an individual, when we were there, they had the testing in the Scrum, but the deployment was a problem.
Yep.
So we said, okay, bring the server into the development area, So the developers can look at it every day while they're working, and then they deploy it.
You remember we were working at NewsPage also?
Brought that into the Scrum.
At NewsPage, we had the same issue.
Yeah.
Where we were trying to keep an online news service. And it constantly had to be up.
The effect of that was the operations people decided, well, we need to do Scrum too.
Right.
And our Scrum needs to make it possible for developers to deploy without them having to call us.
Without them wanting to get you in.
Yeah, I would suspect that in your first sprints, you have operational people, you have operational site people, you have architects, you have infrastructure people, all trying to say, what sort of thing is this going to have to run on to do this? And then to start setting it up and seeing if you can do it. Because if you can't, don't spend any more money.
One of the most interesting Scrum implementations I've seen is in the Netherlands, a company called Schubert Phillips, which is an operations company. They decided some years ago that they ought to just Scrum that whole business, which they have.
Because raising transparency.
Yeah, so, you know, running operations for big banks and big websites, you know, the server architectures, the deployments, the upgrades, the help desk, they said this should all be scrummed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because they want to get that transparency for them and their customers.
And they can cut in half the amount of the time and people they need to actually do the work with Scrum.
And we used to talk about the product backlog having multiple dimensions. Having product that has to be developed dimensions is certainly one layer. Having how it's going to be brought up in the support desk is another. Having another of how you're going to roll it out and what are the options for how many releases you can have out there at any time is another. There are all sorts of things you have to address to get a new usable product out. And people, when they think of a new release, what they think of is something they just got from the vendor and they install it and it doesn't work.
Yeah, there's a lot more than that.
A lot more.
A lot more.
A lot more that successful companies do.
It is interesting because obviously DevOps was called Agile Infrastructure initially, based from the Netherlands when they were doing Scrum. And that's what drove them to say, I think we need to, those operations teams saying we need to have that approach, we need to start thinking more about this.
Well, it also came from, this goes back to Waterfall, where you closed off and sealed the operations area. You did not let those developers in there because they'd screw it up. They'd stop the machine and change things. So development's separate from operations. And this is, you're developing all of that at once.
Exactly, yeah. Those developers aren't very trustworthy there.
Well, there needs to be, today there's automation built so that the developers can't screw it up.
That really does help.
That's
Certainly makes it
DevOps is
a lot
automating,
better.
total automation really.
And you have a little bit of danger with scalable cloud. You know, then you start getting into the ordering and things like that. When you start getting into the elastic cloud, you get into some really interesting other problems.
Yeah. Cool. So I think that's hopefully put that the DevOps point down and dealt with it. This has been interesting. Hopefully you guys at home have learned lots of things. I always learn something talking to these two gentlemen who I've known for far too long. That is today's webcast.
Would you go over that once more?
That I've known you far too long, or gentlemen.
You used to be, you say, I'd really like to meet Jeff and Ken. And then you did. You said,
And then you meet them.
And then you said, well, maybe we don't need to get together so often. And now he's saying, we get together far too often.
Well, to be honest, every time I spend time with you, I always learn something that makes me worried about what I'm doing and how I can improve how I do stuff.
It's our gift.
It
It's
is,
a gift.
ever since my first Scrum, it's just, it doesn't make, life's not easier though because of Scrum sometimes, you do know that.
It's preparing you for raising your children.
And dealing with complex problems in a very chaotic world, which isn't always fun. Sometimes it'd be nice to just relax.
Scrum is really hard now because we have so much complexity and so much chaos. We saw what happened politically in the United States when you saw all the people in manufacturing and warehousing and all that they're out of work, really get upset, because people want stability. People want something they can predict. People want a nice culture, a nice life they can live. Now we're seeing administrative operations like at Philips being gutted and replaced by computers and just-in-time systems. And so you're going to lose, the vice presidents, the directors, all those workers. And so we're going to see more and more people without any degree of certainty. And this is going to create a very interesting world.
And quite a scary one.
Yeah, well, I think what Scrum can do, my hope is that Scrum can create an environment where you have a stable way of dealing with this constant change, which everyone has to address.
We had a minimal example of that where one of the initial people that worked with us on Scrum from Primavera, his daughter was a teacher in inner city Philadelphia schools. Really hard, horrible lives for the kids. And the kids felt hopeless. And so she taught them Scrum, but not Scrum. She taught them that at the start of the week, why don't we set up what we'd like to try to accomplish this week and how we could do it and what things we could do during the week to try to accomplish that. And so then they would have their week planned, and at the end of the week they'd say, well, that worked, it didn't work. Didn't work because of this. Okay, so that'll affect how we plan the next week. So she said, obviously didn't give them a phenomenally better life, but it gave them a sense of control.
Yeah.
And that's pretty important.
I think that is, yes. One of the biggest and most valuable lessons I ever learned about Scrum was very much that trust, the discipline of the Scrum framework. Do the planning session, do the daily, and everything else can be a nightmare, but at least you've got that.
Yeah. And your eyes are open.
Exactly. And then you've got a team that can help you and support you, so you're not in it alone, which is very, very, very important.
We introduced, remember, we had something where you can, for scaling Scrum to multiple Scrum teams, and we introduced into it something that's not in Scrum, but it's an idea called a Scrumble. It says, you have screwed up so badly that just take some time off and think this through some more, and then come on back.
Are you ready to scrumble, as it were, which is not the call that you want to hear.
No.
But sometimes just rely on the basics.
Depends on what you're going after.
Exactly. Well, I think we've done today. We've finished today's webcast. The Scrum Guide's available. Scrumguides.net. Go on to the site.
Scrumguides.org.
Oh, .org, not .net.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh dear, that's a thank you. See, that's the reason why these two guys are here, to keep me right.
And we do have, I do, and probably Jeff have one parting thought I want to leave all the Scrum users with, which is there are really significant things to do out in the world. New opportunities, new challenges, new problems that can be turned into something of value. That's where we need the Scrum people out there helping those people doing so. The danger is that they think, oh, if Scrum were changed and were different, people would know how to do this easier. No, Scrum, even the way we had it in 1995, was adequate for the types of problems we have now. So, stop looking at Scrum and thinking changing it's going to improve your life. You've got tough problems.
Any last words, Jeff?
Well, I think keying off what Ken said, the biggest problem in implementing Scrum, which is the Scrum Guide's attempt to address that, is by, this part of the Scrum Guide is hard, so we won't do that. And so now you have what we call Scrum or Fall, or Water Scrum, which never works. Because even as Takeuchi Tanaka said in that first paper, the way these teams work that they call Scrum, there's a set of interlocking parts. Yeah. It's like the gears in a watch, and to have it tell time, they all need to be turning in a synchronized way. So that would be my parting words. That, the Scrum Guide is short. Implement it all, and then tune to make it better. Don't leave out a piece.
Yeah. So it's a discipline, that fundamental discipline, and then build on top of it Don't
Right.
take things away.
Right.
Because the world needs them.
Excellent. Well, on those final words, thank you for attending today's webinar. They'll also be recorded. Send links to your friends who couldn't attend today because they were too busy maybe doing their daily Scrum. Download the new guide, and if you want to see what's changed, there's a section that tells you what's different in the guide, and hopefully the translations will be coming online over the next few weeks as they come in. So thanks for your time. Thanks everybody. Thanks Ken. Thanks Jeff. Always very illuminating.
And thank you to you guys, because we're really counting on you. You know, we've been doing this so you're prepared and you can go out and do good things. Do it.
No pressure.
They're our hope.
They are our hope. Thanks everybody. Thanks James. Bye-bye.